Welcome back to another episode of Susie Reads. Today we're going to continue our journey of witches, ghosts, and goblins. And today we start chapter 6, where we get to see what's down the passageway. If you remember, right, last episode, the imp disobeyed Miranda and went down the secret passage. And now we get to find out what's down there. Shall we get started? Okay. Chapter 6, The Imp's Secret. The hidden passageway which the imp discovered is known only to a few goblins. The secret is handed down from king to king. The king may tell of its whereabouts to one or two of his most trusted helpers and to his family. When the palace was built, so long ago that nobody remembers the year, the passageway was designed in case the king should ever need to escape in great haste. The kingdom of the goblins is a strong one, however. No army has ever invaded the land. No goblin king has ever been threatened or had to run away. The hidden passageway, although always kept in readiness, has never been used. It is possible that the present king has even forgotten that it is there. It is also possible that it may be most useful to Miranda and her friends. The imp was the first one up. Everyone knows that brownies are early risers, and he was no exception. He whistled a song and danced a jig and wondered how long he could wait for Miranda, Oliver, and Polly to get up. He looked at the clock and turned it ahead an hour so that it struck 6 when it was only 5. Maybe that would bring them out of their beds. But nothing happened. How could anyone sleep who hadn't yet heard of his amazing journey down the hidden passageway? How could anyone sleep when this was the day on which the king of the goblins would give each of them a task to do? The imp could stand it no longer. He went to the door and called the guards. "We should like breakfast immediately. Where we come from, we eat with the rising sun." The guard nodded sleepily and said he would see what he could do. Then the imp knocked on Miranda's door. "Time to get up," he called. "Breakfast will be here soon." He repeated the message for Polly and Oliver. One by one, they joined the imp in the main room of the apartment. "I have never known this early to be this early before," Miranda yawned and looked drowsily about her. "I wonder if the goblins always have breakfast in the middle of the night," Oliver asked. Polly simply sat down in the nearest chair and closed her eyes for another 40 winks. "Good morning," said the imp brightly. "Did everyone have a good night's rest?" "It was such a short good night," Miranda complained. The imp lowered his voice. "Are you ready to hear my story?" He motioned to them to gather close around him. "By the time I had made up my mind to disobey Miranda," the imp looked at Miranda, "it was twilight. The light was so dim in the passageway I could scarcely see a bat before my face." He paused. "Luckily, brownies are not afraid of the dark. Even more luckily, we can see like a cat on the blackest of nights." "Go on and quit bragging," said Miranda. Just at that moment, there was a knock on the door. The guard had arrived with their breakfast. "The cook says that if the food is not quite done, it's because you rushed him so." He turned to leave. "What happened to your clock? It's a whole hour ahead." He turned it back and walked out of the room grumbling about early risers. Miranda gave the imp a sharp look but said nothing. "Finish your story," said Polly between bites of bacon. It was not as crisp as she liked it. "It's not such a long story," the imp remarked, "but it's certainly a long passageway. I walked down miles of stairways." "Is that all you have to tell us?" Miranda asked, staring moodily into her cup of coffee. The imp ignored her early morning crossness. I won't mention the dungeons filled with skeletons that I passed. He glanced at Polly and Oliver. It might frighten the children. Oliver looked indignant. Or the bats squeaking all around, and the huge spiders that were everywhere, the imp added. Polly pretended not to hear. After the dungeons, the imp continued, I came to a sort of storeroom. Food was there, cans and sacks and boxes of it. There were clothes and money, not to mention special items, such as invisible cloaks, 7-league boots, and all kinds of good luck charms. There were swords for killing dragons and magic powders to put giants to sleep. I haven't seen things around like that for years. It was a real museum. I wonder if they still work, mused Miranda. Everything was there that anyone would want or need for a getaway, the imp remarked. But I keep telling you, Miranda said, I don't want to get away. I want to perform my task for the king and find Cactus. You may want to get away, the imp hinted darkly. Things may change. Never trust a goblin, Miranda. Or a brownie, Miranda added quickly. The imp looked hurt. Oliver drank the last of his milk. Did you find anything else? He asked. The most important thing of all, the imp began, only to be interrupted by the guard who said he was ready to clear up the breakfast things if they were finished. Come on in, Miranda said. As he left, the guard announced, I will be back to take you before the king within the hour. Polly took hold of Oliver's hand. For a moment, she wished they were back home, where the worst tasks that one could get were helping with the dishes or cleaning up one's room. Oliver was more interested in the imp's story. What was the most important thing you found, imp? He asked. Well, the imp went on, after I left the storeroom, there were more and more and more stairs. He clumped about the room, bending his knees lower and lower, as though he were walking downstairs, breathing heavily, dodging imaginary bats. Then he cupped his hand to his ear. What did I hear? He asked. I thought I heard the sound of running water, faintly at first, then louder and louder, until it seemed to be rushing towards me. Next, he walked about the room slowly and carefully. The steps grew broader until they led to a bank of swiftly flowing underground river, a river that races beneath this great palace and goes on for miles and miles to freedom. There were boats there, tied to the bank, pulling at the ropes, waiting for us, just in case we need to escape. He added, looking at Miranda. Miranda slowly nodded her head. It is good to know where the hidden passageway leads, she said. Thank you, imp. I hope it is a secret we will have no need of. But now we must all get ready to appear before the king. Whatever we do, the imp suggested, we should leave something here as an excuse to come back to the apartment. If the tasks are impossible, we can return and escape. Good thinking, Miranda said. The imp looked pleased and proud. Almost an hour later, when the guard arrived, they were ready and waiting, looking braver than they felt. All hail His Majesty, King of the Goblins! Cried the guard. Once again, Miranda and her group were brought into the throne room and told to kneel. His Majesty appeared and seated himself upon the golden throne. He was dressed even more splendidly than the first time the group had seen him. His ermine cloak had been replaced by one made of chinchilla. On his chest, attached to a heavy necklace of gold, flashed a ruby as large as a hen's egg. His crown glowed with diamonds and emeralds. Bring them forward. The king pointed to Miranda, Polly, Oliver, and the imp. Now, he said, when they stood before him, I have decided on the tasks you will do. He indicated to Oliver. You will go forth first. The others of the group will be held here so that I will be assured of your return. If you succeed in your task, he said to Oliver, then your sister will be next. When she comes back, it will be Miranda's turn. He paused. I would like to see the creature who is called Imp. Where is he? With me, your majesty. Miranda stepped aside to reveal the imp who had been hiding in her skirt. Behind her skirt. The guard pushed the little fellow toward the king. You, the king said. The imp looked around, hoping that someone else was being spoken to. You, imp, the king made it plain to whom he was talking. It appears to me that you have been the cause of most of the trouble in the land of the goblins. It was you who borrowed the jewels. We have not forgotten this. Therefore, it is decreed that no task will be given you. The crowd gasped. No, the king continued, you are not worthy of a task. Instead, you will go with the others on their appointed tasks. You will be their helper. The imp bowed. He had expected worse. And now, Oliver, the king said, here is your task. For many years, I have yearned for the perfect pearl. Diamonds, rubies, and emeralds I have. But since we are a land without oceans, we have no pearls. The perfect pearl, I have heard, is owned by the king of the giants, who lives by the secret sea 2,000 miles away. Bring this pearl to me. It is up to you to find out how to get there, how to gain the pearl. That is your task. The imp will be your helper. When you have returned with the pearl, I will tell Polly what her task is. The king waved his hand, and they were dismissed. As they walked down the stairs and the long hallways to their apartments, Oliver whispered to the imp, we must work together now. Perhaps the underground river will take us to the secret sea. Together we'll capture the perfect pearl. The imp shrugged his shoulders. It's unfair, It's unfair, he whispered back. I have 3 tasks to do. I think I'll go on strike. He marched on. Oliver shook his head. It was clear that there were problems ahead. And that is the end of chapter 6. And next week, we will read about the land of the giants. Will they be able to find the pearl? Will they be able to get it from the giants? We'll read and find out. See you next time on Susie Reads.